it's Shari here today, and I'm going to be making this card with these little feathers that I am going to color with colored pencils on some dark cardstock. So I've got my colors already picked out of my pencils here. I've got some Storm Cloud cardstock, and we're going to be using this mini set called Dream. It's an older set, but I really like the feathers in this set. So let me just move my pencils out of the way. And I've got some Storm Cloud cardstock cut down to 5.5 by 4.25, which is the size of an A2 size card, but we're actually going to be trimming it with a die here after I color. I'm just using the black licorice ink, and I've got my 2 sizes of feathers mounted on 2 different blocks. And I'm just going to stamp them around, turning them in different directions to make a pattern paper. So one of the tips when you're doing something like this is to be sure that you stamp some off the side so it looks like you've had a piece of pattern paper and then you cut it down. Part of the reason that I cut this a little bigger and I'm going to trim it with my die later is so that I didn't have the little stitching details that I had to color over with my pencils, because that would have made it not very smooth at those points. So I think it's better to color first and then we'll run it through the die cut machine with that rectangle die later. So now that I've got my pattern all stamped out the way I want it, I can start coloring. And I'm going to try and list my colors here for you in case you want to know, but of course you can use any pencil. Now I tried a couple different methods on a little test piece before I decided the best way to color these, and I'm just doing a flicking motion with my pencils here. And it kind of creates that nice textured look that you see in a feather with all those little pieces of the feather, you know, that can separate. So I'm starting with my lightest color first, which in this case is the pink rose. And I'm just doing the whole feather very lightly, starting at the center and then just kind of pulling my color to the outside. And it's not going to be completely filled in with this first layer. So the whole thing with this is to layer the colors on top of one another. Now I'm going to go in with the hot pink. And I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm not going to take that hot pink all the way to the outside edges, really. I'm just going to let a little bit of that lighter color pink peek out behind it. And this is going to kind of be darker at the bottom and a little lighter at the top. And you'll see here in a little bit how I'm going to make that happen. Now I can go in with my darkest color on top. And I'm actually going to kind of draw a line up that center stem of the feather to kind of fill that in a little bit and define it a little more. And then now I can go in with my darker color, and you can see I'm kind of stopping that short of that mid-tone, but I'm actually going to make it a little thicker at the bottom and then not quite so much of that dark at the top. So here I'm kind of defining where I want that dark to stop. And then I'm going to work my way up. Sometimes it's better to start from the center and make that kind of flick motion towards the outside, and then you'll see at some point it's easier to go the other direction so that you can define that nice edge of the feather. And then finally I can go back in with my lightest color and fill in and define those edges a little more and cover up that dark cardstock. I just really think this is a really cool look on this dark cardstock. And now you can kind of see that texture I've created with the strokes of my pencil. So I colored quite a few, and I'm just going to speed up the process here, but I wanted you to see kind of how to do all these different colors, especially because some of these feathers I kind of blended 2 colors together. So in this one, for instance, I'm doing aqua and peach. So I started with the lightest aqua, which is the Deco Aqua, and then the lightest peach was the light peach. And I'm doing the same thing. I'm just defining the bottom of that feather as aqua and the top of that feather as peach color. So I'm doing the same method as I did on the pink one, starting with the lightest, working my way up to the darkest, and just adding layers. So I kind of went ahead and did all the aqua at the bottom, and then now I can go in with my darker peach color, which is that nectar pencil, and I can add in the color on the top. And then where the 2 colors meet, it's kind of nice to overlap them a little bit, because you know these feathers are not perfect in nature, so adding a little bit to where maybe a couple of the peach pieces kind of made it into the aqua, or some of the aqua, a couple flicks of that made it into the peach, makes it look a little more realistic. So here is a purple one, and this one is just all one color, it's all purple, and it's the little tiny one, which doesn't take quite as much to color. And you could even skip the lightest one if you wanted a darker look. You could start with the mid one and then do the darker on top. One thing when you are doing the smaller ones is to make sure those pencils are nice and sharp. Mine have kind of dulled a little bit as you color. So you want to make sure your pencils are sharp so you can get a nice clean edge and define the ends and edges of that feather pretty well. Now this one I did yellow, and once I had it colored yellow, I thought it kind of looked a little two-dimensional and it needed a little more pop to it. So I actually went in with the hot pink and just did a couple little flecks of that hot pink over the yellow, and I really liked how it turned out. Now for the blue one here. This one is all blue, but I used 3 shades of blue. And I think this one really kind of pops off that dark cardstock really well. And it's just like the pink one. I went in with the lightest color, then did a mid-tone, and I'm defining that kind of stem thing in the middle there. I don't know the technical term for that part of the feather. And then I went over with the dark blue. Honestly think this one could have used a darker blue maybe than the one that I picked, but I still like the way it turned out. And actually when you go back in with the lightest and kind of pull it into that dark blue, and here is the case when I started on the outside and pulled it in versus the other way, it turned out really nice. Now this one is going to be purple at the bottom and then yellow at the top, which is a really cool combination too. And this whole idea was actually inspired by a pair of pajama pants that I own that I bought at Target. It's this nice darker gray fabric, and it has these feathers that look like they're watercolored on it in these lighter pastel-y colors. So that is where the inspiration for this came from. So you can find inspiration anywhere really. And the key to all these, like I said before, is layers. You just kind of keep working it until you get it to look the way that you want. Alright, so I didn't show you coloring all of them. I thought that might be a little bit much, but I colored quite a few so you could see those color combinations. So now I'm going to die cut it, and these are some brand new dies that will be coming out on May 18th. They're the inside out stitched rectangles. These actually cut a stitching on the outside of the rectangle as well as the inside, just like the ones we have, but that cut line is actually going to cut a rectangle that is a size between the small sets and the large sets that lawnfawn already offers. So I'm going to grab, this is actually cross-stitched rectangle, but it's the largest of the small set, and you can see that it sits right inside there. So it's going to create an 1/8 inch mat instead of a 1/4 inch mat. So I'm just going to line this up with the edges of this cardstock that I have here, and I'll just hold it in place with some Post-it note tape. One thing I try to be careful with when I'm using tape and die cutting when I've colored with colored pencils is to try to not stick it on the colored pencils, because it will stick to that and pull it off slightly. So you can see this creates that nice stitching detail, and it's going to make a nice thin mat. It's a little hard to see here because I'm going to do a little tone on tone matting here. Now to finish off this front panel, I'm going to be using these Gansai Tambi Starry watercolors. These are gold metallic watercolor, and I really think these are fun to add little accents. So I'm using the yellow gold in the set, but all of these are really great colors. It just depends on the look that you want. I'm trying to get it nice and kind of watery, but still creamy and thick so that I can do some paint splatters. So I'm just tapping it with my finger to do some small paint splatters across the whole front of the card. And I just think this adds a nice, delicate shimmer and some added interest to the front of the card. So once I get these little water droplets of metallic gold color where I want them, I'm just going to set this aside to dry a little bit. And actually I had to dry it a little bit with my heat tool. But if you've got time, I would have just let it sit there and dry so I didn't have to worry about my piece of cardstock warping at all. And what's really cool is if you just let it dry, that metallic stays on top of that colored pencil. Now I'm going to work on my sentiment. So I've got a little piece of scrap black cardstock here, and I'm going to be using the Thanks sentiment from Big Scripty Words. And I'm going to heat emboss that with some white embossing powder. So I'm just going to get that stamp out, pick it up with my block. I'm going to be using the VersaFine, which is the clear sticky ink, which is great for embossing. And I used my powder tool on that piece of black cardstock. That's what I was using earlier. That keeps the embossing powder from sticking to places that you don't want it to stick to. And I'm just going to add some embossing powder to that stamped sentiment. This is going to make a nice bold sentiment across that kind of darker background that we created. And I really like that this particular set has matching dies, so you can make a nice little delicate sentiment to use on your card, and then we don't cover up too much of those lovely feathers that we colored earlier. So I'm just going to heat that up with my heat tool here and melt that embossing powder to make that nice bold white sentiment on that black cardstock. So now that I'm done melting that embossing powder, I'm going to use the matching dies that come with this set, or coordinate with this set, I should say, to cut that out and make that nice delicate sentiment that I can use on the front of my card. I'm also going to use the post-it note tape again to hold it in place. This one you really got to hold in place if you want it to come out perfectly. And then I will just run that right through my Cuttlebug. So there's that nice delicate sentiment. Pop out those little pieces on the inside, or you could leave them in. It kind of has a cool look if you leave them in too. But I think that's going to look great on the front of my card. So I've added some foam tape all over the back of my panel. I did heat set that watercolor a little bit to make it dry faster, and so my panel is slightly warped, but it's going to flatten out once I get it stuck to my card base. So I've got a top folding card here. This is an A2 size card, so it's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and you can see this is going to make that nice thin little mat between the card base and that new inside out stitch rectangle that I cut. Okay, now to put my sentiment on, and I want it kind of towards the bottom to the right a little bit. I kind of had a little void between that purple and that blue feather, which I thought would be a great place to put the sentiment. So that's why I made sure I turned my panel this direction. And I'm going to let it hang off the side a little bit, and then I'm just going to trim the little tail that's left off. So I'm using a glue pen here, since this is a delicate little thin sentiment. And then I'm just going to lay a clear block on top just to kind of hold it there for a little bit until that glue dries. And once that glue's dry, which did not take long at all, I'm just going to trim the little end off the thanks. And then to finish off, I've got some clear sequins here, and I'm just going to scatter them around a little bit and add those just for a little more shine and embellishment so that my card's not so flat. And once I've got them where I want them, I'm going to be using the Ranger multi-matte or multi-medium in matte, and I've got a little precision tip on the end of mine so that I don't squirt out too much. And the best way for me to put my sequins down is just to use tweezers. so I don't get glue on my hands. And there is my finished card. I like that extra little bit of shine that the sequins add, and the gold is really great in real life. It's kind of hard to see in photographs sometimes. Thanks for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye.